So I was browsing Twitter one day, as one does, and I stumbled upon something kinda weird. You see, BioShock Infinite had just had its 10th anniversary, so people online were talking about it again. Mostly just reminiscing how popular the game was and how it kinda dropped off the map in recent years. Heck, I played it on day one and I barely ever think about it anymore. And that seems to be the common experience for most people. But one tweet about it in particular stuck out to me. It was actually a repost of a viral meme that had been made the year prior, and it goes something like this. BioShock Infinite was one of the most hyped games of its time, but its only lasting legacy was that the part of its main character was responsible for several breakthroughs in 3D animation. Almost immediately, this got me thinking. I had seen this tweet before. It was absolutely everywhere last year, with many people reposting it and sharing stuff like it, including myself. In fact, if you Google BioShock Infinite Legacy, it's one of the first things that pops up, which is pretty funny. But when I saw it this time, for whatever reason, I decided to look a little deeper. I'm gonna dismiss the part about the game's legacy, because that is almost certainly a joke. After all, BioShock Infinite is also responsible for Matthew Matosis saying the N-word and this Cliffy B tweet, which are both much more important. But the idea that Rule 34 made about Elizabeth somehow revolutionized 3D animation feels like it might be true, or at the very least plausible enough that a ton of people reposted it without question. And that's what I wanted to interrogate. Now, does anyone provide a source for that information? No, of course not. In fact, most of the replies to tweets like this one just double down on how sure they are that this must be the case, without anything more than a trust me bro to go off of. I mean, Blender animation went through so many innovations because people wanted 3D smut of her, it's comparable to when film developed color. First of all, no. Second of all, in 2013, almost all of the innovations would have probably been through Source Filmmaker, not Blender. Third of all, what? No. But the claim might make a lot of intuitive sense to you because this idea that porn innovates technology is incredibly well known. Video streaming, online credit card payments, digital cameras, VHS, these are all things that exist today almost solely because of adult content. You'd think adult animation was surely responsible for some breakthrough, one way or another. In any case, at this point my YouTuber brain was firing on all cylinders, and after about a week of hyperfixating on this subject, doing the best research I could looking for an answer, I found surprisingly little on not just the game or 3D animation, but adult content in general. For something so prominent that its one defining trait is that it exists for everything, there's not a lot talking about Rule 34's major influences or milestones. I mean, don't even try to find any videos about it on YouTube unless you want to get recommended stuff like this for the rest of your life. But it's a shame, because if you actually look into it, adult animations and drawings and parodies are super influential throughout pretty much all of history. I found so many connections and cool tidbits and insane stories just from this brief look into the topic. And I'm not sure how many people know any of this. So if you're watching this video entirely to learn if BioShock Infinite did actually pioneer animation technology, don't worry, I'll get into that. But I also want to go over a brief history of Rule 34 itself, because it's way more interesting than you might think. Now, really quick, I do know that making a video like this one is a bad idea because YouTube currently has a sniper trained on my position just waiting for me to show a butt. But because I'm investing so much time into this, I am gonna try to not get demonetized. What that means is that some of the words will be getting bleeped and any adult images will be blurred beyond recognition. Though I am still gonna say Rule 34 because that's the entire subject of the video, meaning there's a good chance that all of this is for nothing because I know that's a term YouTube doesn't like. I'll let you know in a pinned comment if the video gets hit. That being said, if you want to watch this whole thing uncensored, or you just want to support the channel while I don't make any money from this, you can do all of that for just $1 on my Patreon, linked in the description. The other main way you can support me is by checking out gamersups.gg/Lextorias, where you can get 10% off some really tasty energy drinks. I'll talk more about them at the end, but one of the reasons I love Gamersups is they're willing to sponsor literally anything, which is really helpful when I have the bright idea to spend an entire month studying video game porn. Anyways, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Part 1, Early Cinema. Wait, what? The origins of Rule 34 itself are pretty well known. In the early days of the internet, there was a lot of adult parody content being put online, especially in the form of lewd images. And in 2004, a webcomic was made by Peter Morley-Soter, sharing their surprise at how common these images seem to be. The caption read, "Rule 34, if it exists, there is of it, no exceptions," and depicted Peter being shocked to see Calvin and Hobbes having some unspeakable things done to them. The comic also includes this fun little edgy joke at the bottom that flashbangs me every single time because everyone always crops it out, but it was a webcomic picked up by 4chan in 2004, so what do you expect? So 4chan and other forums then ran with this comic as far as they could, picking up more and more rules that were mostly just inside jokes, but some also relating to the 34th one. Stuff like Rule 35, if no is found at the moment, it will be made. And Rule 63, for every given male character, there is a female version of that character, and vice versa. But right off the bat, I'm gonna separate Rule 34 as a meme from Rule 34 as a category of art, because while the meme is popular itself, its history is really boring and short, and I've covered most of it already. I mean, fun fact, the Wikipedia article for it is shorter than the script to this video up until this point. No, what I and most people are looking for when we type Rule 34 into the search bar of an incognito window is any X-rated parody content that isn't live action. You see, parody is already one thing, but the P word is still associated with real people doing the deed, and we don't really have a good English equivalent to something like hentai. So if someone outside of Japan makes an adult drawing of a character, there isn't really a good term to describe it, besides cartoon, which just sounds weird. And all of this just kind of led people to call any non-live action Western erotica Rule 34. The big distinction still being that it has to be based on a pre-existing character, though some people will ignore that too sometimes. Either way, if you're talking adult parody content, that has existed since forever. If you want a fun example I got off Wikipedia, there's actually a pretty well-known case of people in the 18th century making these lewd pamphlets about Marie Antoinette and other nobles as a way to make fun of them. And these things are explicit. One of the more famous ones, titled The Royal includes such great lines as, "Oh rage, despair, my poor little Mighty queen, sorry I'm in my nightie, but Hercules was f***ing me in your antechamber. So why the daggers? Has some f***ing ghoul finally given you the clap?" It's great. If you want to have a laugh, definitely go read some of these. Not too many of them though, as most of the ones written about Antoinette can be incredibly cruel. Like, for example, the very subtly titled "The List of All the People with Whom the Queen Has Had Depraved Relations," which might be the first real example of someone making up allegations to get a celebrity canceled. Fast forwarding a couple centuries, we then get to people making stuff much closer to what Rule 34 is today. That being adult parody comics called Tijuana Bibles. These were palm-sized little books that started in the 20s that took everything from popular newspaper comic strip characters to prominent figures like Al Capone and put them into raunchy situations. Some of them almost as absurdly funny as the Marie Antoinette pamphlets. You might have seen one of these prominently featured if you've ever seen Watchmen, since there's a scene in it with one of the characters reading one made about them. And if you're curious, the name Tijuana Bible just comes from this myth that they were made in Tijuana, since to this day nobody really knows where they came from. Though, interestingly enough, these little adult books would morph into a much larger underground comic scene in the 50s to 70s. Because in 1954, the Comics Code Authority was formed to regulate unsavory material, which was widely regarded as a bad move, and turned a fun little game of looting Betty Boop into an underground counterculture movement fighting against censorship. This comic scene, now spelled with an X, was somewhat mixed in with gay rights activism and punk subcultures, having a major focus on satirizing existing cartoons and prominently featuring sex, drugs, and anything else the Comics Code Authority didn't like. And on top of being the direct inspiration for a lot of more mainstream works, like the animated sequences from Monty Python's Flying Circus or the entirety of Howard the Duck, the scene also led to the first X-rated animated movie, Fritz the Cat. Directed by Ralph Bakshi, probably most famous for the 1978 Lord of the Rings movie, or that one time they dunked on Corridor Digital for their shitty AI anime video, Fritz the Cat took the underground comic strip character of the same name and had them, as the BBC so eloquently puts it, attend drug-fueled steal guns from corrupt cops, set his college on fire, find himself in the middle of a race riot, and blow up a power plant. Now, despite how many people on Twitter might call that based, the MPAA saw it as pornographic, hence the X rating. But it did become the highest grossing animated independent film of all time, so who cares what they thought? Bakshi's underground animation would then prove to be a huge influence on basically everything ever. There's no proof of this, but almost every article you'll read in the guy links his success to the future creation of adult animated works like The Simpsons, Family Guy, and South Park. And much more easily provable is that his studio was one of the first places that animators like Bruce Timm, John Kricfalusi, and Andrew Stanton worked, who went on to create these little-known projects called Batman the Animated Series, Ren and Stimpy, and Finding Nemo. So yeah, some of the most beloved animated franchises of all time can be traced back to people drawing cartoon characters having sex with each other back in the 20s. As a brief aside, at around the same time that Fritz the Cat was releasing, there was also this really interesting moment in copyright law. Exciting, I know, but stick with me. It all started when one Dan O'Neill, former cartoonist for the San Francisco Chronicle, started his own underground comics collective called the Air Pirates back in 1971. A collective named after a group of Mickey Mouse villains, they produced comics showing the Mouse and Friends getting absolutely freaky with the express intent of pissing Disney off. Even going so far as to give copies of their comic to the son of a Disney chairman who spread them out on the table of a board meeting. Disney, of course, calmly responded with a lawsuit to the tune of several $100,000 that lasted 8 years and cost them $2 million in legal fees. There's a great article detailing the entire legal battle I'll link to, but the long and short of it is that the Air Pirates lost, got hit with way too many punitive damages to ever pay off, and instead came to an agreement that they'd never make another Mickey Mouse parody ever again. However, this lawsuit happened while the Copyright Act of 1976 was going through, which Disney heavily lobbied for in order to extend how long they could hold onto the rights of their characters, pretty much to help them in this exact situation. And there's not much proof to suggest they lobbied for the act because of all the porn made of Mickey Mouse, but hey, what are they gonna do if I say that's the case? Sue me? Though, interestingly enough, what the Copyright Act also codified was every YouTuber's favorite, fair use. And years later, another case, Campbell v. Acuff Rose, saw the court rule in favor of fair use, setting a precedent that would have seen the Air Pirates win on the basis of their parodies not being a market substitute for the original. That article that I'm taking this all from goes so far as to call in a copyright lawyer to weigh in, who said, "On general principle, I would agree that the Air Pirates would have won under Acuff Rose, except that I think most courts are too sexually ill at ease to give Air Pirates fair use." Which is a very interesting little look behind the curtain, huh? That one of the main reasons a parody would lose in court is because it contained graphic nudity. If those Mickey Mouse comics had just been a little more PG-13, they would have set one of the most important copyright precedents in history, instead of Campbell v. Acuff Rose, which I'll now reveal to you was a lawsuit over a rap parody of Pretty Woman by Roy Orbison. Their iron grip on copyright in the West, Japan at the same time had a very similar scene that was unfolding. Doujins, which I've talked about before, just meaning self-published works, were huge in Japan in the 70s, having entire comiket conventions based around sharing people's fan-made doujinshi, which were often based on pre-existing properties and often extremely explicit. The amount of artists that got their start in doujins and would later go on to make official manga and anime is honestly too high to count. Even narrowing it down to hentai doujins based on pre-existing properties still leaves the list surprisingly long, despite how common pen names and aliases are. I mean, Nanashi started out with hentai of Naruto before making Nagatoro, Azumanga Daioh was made by Kiyohiko Azuma, who started their career with Sailor Moon parodies and whatever this is, Ken Akamatsu made Cardcaptor Sakura and Revolutionary Girl Utena smut before creating Love Hina, and my personal favorite, Kota Hirano, the creator of Hellsing, made hentai featuring many of the characters that would later get put into Hellsing, in a very rare case of the X-rated parody existing before the thing it's parodying. And while Japan's copyright law is technically a lot more strict than the US's, a lot of these adult parodies are seen as mostly fine, because Japan doesn't actually have any official equivalent to fair use, but they do classify doujins as something called shinko-kuzai, a type of crime that only the violated party themselves can ever prosecute, meaning it basically operates on the trust system between the rights holder and whoever is making the doujin. So the letter of the law is still pretty strict, and there's certainly a lot of doujins that would violate it, but as long as you don't directly piss someone off enough that they go after you, you're probably fine. Most of the industry sees self-published works as a good thing, and the culture around doujin parodies is lax enough that most companies don't ever go too far. Well, most companies except Nintendo. The morning of January 13th, 1999, a young woman in Fukuoka would have her house raided. As they describe,
"There was no prior warning. On the morning of the day of the arrest, police suddenly arrived and began to search the house. And since it was the Kyoto Prefectural Police, not the local prefectural police, I thought it was a bad prank at first. In the end, I was arrested a little after 1 p.m. They ransacked my house, stuffed everything into cardboard boxes, confiscated everything, and for the first time in my life, I was confronted with a warrant of arrest. I was taken to Kyoto, surrounded by detectives with handcuffs on my hands and a rope around my waist, and a police officer with the rope in his hand following me from behind and making me walk in front of them. I learned later that the police had been working on evidence for several months before the arrest and had already been stalking out my apartment since August or September. I had thought that a car with Kyoto license plates was often parked in front of my apartment, but I had no idea that I was being watched. The jail was cold, the floor was hard, and I was stiff for 2 or 3 days after I returned home. In the end, I was detained for 22 days. 2 days for the arrest, 10 days for the detention, and 10 days for the extension. In addition, I have to pay all the travel expenses for returning from Kyoto, and the transportation costs for the seized items that were returned to me, most of which I was forced to relinquish. Someone called me on the final line.
That sounds horrible. This poor woman had been followed by the police for months, raided like she was Pablo fucking Escobar, and then thrown in detention for 3 weeks before being forced to find her own way back home. All the while being reported on by every newspaper in the country in a situation that would seriously upset, if not ruin, most people's lives. So what did they do to deserve this? They made an erotic Pokemon doujinshi. That's it. Apparently Ash Ketchum and Pikachu get a little too friendly in it, but no, they weren't actually arrested for any problematic content, it was entirely copyright. Nintendo found out they violated their IP and just decided to skip any form of warning or normal lawsuit to go straight for criminal prosecution. Which, I don't think I have to repeat, is incredibly fucked up. Nintendo said they took such extreme measures because this woman was selling her doujinshi via mail order, which they said worried them because children might have been able to buy it, which is a strange thing to say when Nintendo themselves had been licensing an official ecchi Pokemon manga for years at that point, one that shows Ash's dick in Pokeballs. Nintendo also goes on record to say they weren't trying to make an example out of this woman, they were just trying to protect their image. But I don't believe that for a second. They were absolutely trying to send a message. The same message that Disney was trying to send decades earlier. Don't you dare lewd our characters. And you know what? They were right. Since those major lawsuits, Disney and Nintendo's characters would never have Rule 34 made of them again. So this thing called the internet was invented back in the 60s, and by the year 2000 it was kind of a big deal, bringing the adult parody community full circle from it's so over to we're so back more than ever before. And you know the rest, yada yada yada, some dude made a webcomic after seeing Calvin and Hobbes exploring each other's bodies, and we have Rule 34 as we know it today. Some people might argue everything I've talked to up until this point hasn't been true Rule 34, since it is explicitly a rule of the internet, but that is why I wanted to separate it as a category of art and not just anything directly connected to the meme. With the internet though, the amount of explicit parodies being made skyrocketed pretty much instantly, if only because now anyone making comics for themselves in their bedroom could share it with the world and find a community. And two big innovations that facilitated that would be image borus and newgrounds. The very quick summary of borus is that some of the earliest forms of online forums were text boards, these public spaces where people could anonymously post whatever they wanted. The most popular of these being Japan's 2channel, created in 1999. However, as the name implies, these were limited to text only. So with the development of technology came image boards, which should be self-explanatory. 2channel actually had their own sister image board, Futaba, created in 2001, unofficially called 2chan, which, as expected, immediately became filled to the brim with hentai and other anime-related images, and also later inspired the creation of 4chan in 2003, which became the most popular of all of these by a long shot. Though people on 2chan and other image boards at the time really wanted a place they could collect all those images, since the nature of image boards meant nothing was really permanent or easily searchable. So a user we only know by the name of Albert created an image archiving site with searchable tags, comments, and a scoring system, and they called it danboru, after the Japanese word for cardboard. The website went up on May 17th, 2005, and people immediately started sharing all their hentai and other stuff from 2chan on it, leading to the over 6 million images it has archived today. Pro tip, if you ever want to find what the first image posted on any of these sites is, they almost always sort them by ID number in the URL. So if you go to any image on the site and then replace the ID number at the end with a 1, it'll usually take you to the oldest post. Danboru's is this surprisingly tame pic of Tamaki Kosaka from 2 Heart in her underwear, posted by Albert himself 5 days after the site was created, which is kinda wholesome if you think about it. Anyways, on April 2nd, 2007, Danboru was taken down for maintenance, with the admin posting the entire source code online, leading to other Boru sites popping up all over the place. You had ones related to My Little Pony, Homestuck, or certain anime fandoms, and even furry content like E621. Basically any popular property or community you could think of got its own Boru or board. The most important Boru to this story, though, is rule34.pahil.net. Going up in 2007 and directly based on Danboru's code, this site was entirely dedicated to Rule 34 images. No original content, no weeb shit, nothing safe for work, just explicit images of pre-existing, typically Western characters. And it became so incredibly popular. If you've heard of Rule 34, you've probably seen some reference to this site. Even just the ugly green color that it uses has become synonymous with X-rated fan art to most people. And the popularity of characters or series can be pretty accurately rated by how many hundreds of posts they have on it. Now, there have been other Rule 34 image boards that have popped up since, but nothing like Pahil. And if you're wondering, I have no idea why it's called that. I'm not even sure if I'm saying it right. Some cursory research online shows me it's a common Hindu name for girls, meaning first, but between that and Danboru meaning cardboard, I don't know what the connection is. Someone leave a comment if you do. What I do know is that one of the first images uploaded on Pahil, and I guess one of the first officially cataloged pieces of Rule 34 by extension, is Nikki Wong from famous Canadian kids cartoon 16. Yeah, kinda underwhelming, but also Go Canada, love that for us. The same user also posted Naked Alf in a Mountain Dew can f***ing a sandwich. By this point, we should have a good idea where a lot of Rule 34 art and animation gets found, since these Boros usually have bots and power users that automatically re-upload content from all over the internet, for weirdos like me to find at 3 in the morning while doing research for a YouTube video. But if you're asking where the art gets made, then you'd have to look at sites like Pixiv, DeviantArt, and the most important one of all, Newgrounds. Founded in 1995 by Tom Fulp and opened to the public on April 6, 2000 with its Flash portal, Newgrounds made it big as a website that allowed users to upload art, animation, and games that ran on Flash with no major censorship applied to any of it. I mean, some of the most popular stuff that was ever added were games where you could punch Osama bin Laden in the face, so boobs and butts were more than okay. The only thing a user had to worry about when uploading was making sure that their post got enough positive votes in its early judgment period to stay on the site. And this practically non-existent barrier to entry meant that up-and-coming artists, even of the adult variety, could share their works and get recognition. So naturally, a lot of what got posted in Newgrounds and what became part of its culture was hardcore parodies, edgy satire, and p***. You'd see the Gears of War guys whip their junk out, a point-and-click game where you undress Samus, an X-rated parody of the Ultimate Showdown called the Ultimate Orgy. It was the Wild West. And with early internet humor, usually the raunchier or more offensive something was, the more likely it was to go viral. The connection should be obvious, but Newgrounds was essentially the underground comics movement 2.0. Instead of comic strip characters, people would satirize video games and anime. Mickey and Minnie Mouse weren't the ones drawn doing it, it was the cast of Sonic the Hedgehog. The same way Batman the Animated Series and Finding Nemo came from people working under Bakshi, Smiling Friends and BoJack Horseman came from former Newgrounds creators. And outside of the ones who became publicly known, like Aaron Hansen, Chris O'Neill, Zach Hadel, and Michael Cusack, you had the people who furthered adult animation, like Zone. I'm gonna be real with you, if you don't recognize these Teen Titans videos that Zone made from 2007 to 2009, we can't be friends. Finding this on your parents' laptop while alone on the weekend was like opening the Ark of the Covenant. These explicit animated parodies Zone made were, and still are, some of the most influential works in the entire space. Their Teen Titans series all went viral, each hitting the top of Newgrounds with tens of millions of views, and it's not hard to see why, because they are all incredibly high quality, mixing in real footage and voice clips from the show alongside detailed flash animation, and they all use really popular characters, namely Raven, who single-handedly changed my taste in women forever. Zone didn't even let up after that either. You know that viral TikTok sound with the Animal Crossing cat that took over the internet a while back? Yeah, that was them. They're still going viral on social media almost a decade and a half later. And alongside them came Shadman onto Newgrounds in 2009, Spidoru in 2012, and ℝ𝕦𝕝𝕝 in 2015, becoming what I would consider the Mount Rushmore of adult parody artists on the internet. Every single one of them putting out professional quality artwork and animation that raised the bar for the medium, or having viral hits that you have definitely seen before, since they have a tendency to sneak their way into the mainstream. In fact, to tell you a bit more about their success, ℉𝕦𝕝𝕝 is currently the most followed account on Newgrounds and has started making studio-quality original animation like their Fandletale series. Spidoru then has over 1 million subscribers and 100 million views on their Safe for Work YouTube channel. And Shadman has a Business Insider article written about how they got arrested in California for assault with a deadly weapon. So they're all doing great for themselves. Suffice to say, Newgrounds was the next major scene that completely shaped art culture as we know it, and Rule 34 artists were certainly a part of that. To drive the point home as simply as possible, I can guarantee if you can think of a prominent artist online right now, they've probably either submitted something to the Newgrounds portal at some point in their life, or they're heavily inspired by someone who did. Though, as you'll notice, all of the creators I'm talking about here specialize in 2D animation and artwork, whereas this video started off with me looking into 3D. So why don't I back things up and switch to the third dimension? Because there is a reason I didn't talk about it until now. To give some brief background on sex in the third dimension as a whole, the first fully computer-animated depiction of nudity I could find was a wireframe movie called Metadata made in 1971. Also from Canada, hell yeah, 2 for 2. Pygmalion in 1988 was then the first polygonal nudity, since it showed a really low-quality female model get its clothes blown off. Honestly, I could probably show this on YouTube if I wasn't playing it safe. It's really tame. Video game companies like Illusion would also pop up in 1993 in Japan and start producing eroge games with 3D graphics. Here's some footage from their CG FMV game Death's Blood in 1997, which had pre-rendered sex cutscenes. Though full CG porn didn't really take off until 2000, with Playboy's Dark Justice. A dark, brooding, dystopian crime drama featuring a morally gray vigilante heroine who gets herself in steamy situations. This 20-episode television show produced by Playboy featured cutting-edge 3D graphics to show the hottest, most realistic nudity imaginable. Here's a clip.
The stress, it's playing havoc with my spastic colon, Larson. Take a note. So this is our big, bad vigilante.
Why, hello, Sarge. I didn't know you were a patron of the arts.
Yeah, that is a real show. And that is the highest quality clip of it on the internet, because it was literally uploaded by the lead animator, who said they were given 10 days to make each episode. And it's up on YouTube for free if you want. They don't even care about the nudity because it's so low quality and bizarre looking you can't tell what's happening.
She wants to play games, huh? Hand me the nuclear bazooka.
But, Sarge, that will kill everyone in the tri-state area.
But none of that is Rule 34. That is all original content. Rule 34 wouldn't really hit the third dimension until the release of Blender, an open source program made free to the public in 1998. And even then, it was sparse, because the whole point of places like Newgrounds was that early Flash animation was incredibly easy to pick up and learn. Anyone with a computer could do it. And even if you wanted to make more traditional drawings and animations, there were more options available to you than I could count. Here's erotica someone made about Zone using Flipnote Studio for the Nintendo 3DS. 3D animation, on the other hand, was a pain in the ass, and still is, but like 1,000 times more so before the 2010s, because it was incredibly resource intensive, requiring a monster computer to even run the programs, and unlike Flash or Photoshop or anything else, where you could create these little 2D drawings from scratch, you had to model, keyframe, and animate every single asset every single time without being able to look at the finished product for hours while it rendered. It wasn't worth it, so few really got into making it. Most any 3D Rule 34 for the longest time was really just limited to someone with professional tools like 3ds Max putting out a still CG render of a character they liked. And also machinimas, but that's a whole other topic. Sex mods for video games have been around forever. While doing research, I even found one for The Sims 1 by M&M Needful Things that came out in 2003, which is also Canadian. Let's go. And in the mid-2000s, people were already recording videos with this stuff. Like one of my favorites of all time, Juicy Bush. But the real kickstart to Rule 34 in 3D would be Valve. Best known for insert Half-Life 3 joke here, Valve's whole claim to fame were the games made on their Source engine. Originally based on Gold Source from 1998, which was itself a modded version of the Quake engine, Source powered some of the most influential games of all time, which all pushed the cutting edge in terms of what the medium could do. And Valve wasn't afraid to share this with people, promoting mods and software that let practically anyone create with the tools that Valve had made. All the way back in 2007, people were posing modded nude characters in Gary's mod, in what would have been an incredibly tedious process just to get something that looked better than your typical machinima. But in 2012, Valve would make software specifically for posing and animating characters in real time, and they'd call it Source Filmmaker. It's not an understatement to say that SFM is the reason 3D Rule 34 took off, because it lowered the entry level of professional animation to a degree that it could finally compete with something like Flash. It wasn't necessarily better than other programs like Blender, in fact it had many limitations, but it was simple, way less intensive, and being on Steam meant it had access to the Steam Workshop, a free community hub where people could upload models, assets, maps, and more that you could download into your own workspace with the click of a button. Assets that you could get by straight up ripping them out of another game, by the way. Find a character you like in a new release, just download their model, do a whole bunch of other stuff to them, I am skipping over the complicated bits, and port it into SFM. Or find an upload from someone who already did. Boom, now you can do whatever you want with them, and you could render out your final product in minutes. It should be incredibly obvious why this was huge for Rule 34. Within a month of SFM launching in June of 2012, someone had already uploaded animations on Paheel of Alex Vance and the Pyro from TF2 smoking some sausage. Which, just why is it always the Pyro? I consider myself pretty open-minded to a lot of weird interests in this space, but Pyro is just so popular for some reason. I do not understand why. Anyways, with SFM out and giving people the ability to animate their favorite video game characters doing all the dirty things their minds could imagine, all it would take is some popular games to take characters from. Obviously, you had a lot of works from all the Valve properties, since their models basically came free with the software, but right out of the gate, Mass Effect 3 and Tomb Raider proved to be top contenders, having come out in 2012 and 13. A lot of Mass Effect's popularity came from the wide variety of romanceable characters that already had sex cutscenes in-game, like Tali'Zorah and Araya, my beloved. And Tomb Raider's success was even more obvious, considering Lara Croft is the definitive hot girl in video games, and the reboot had given her a slick new redesign and a downloadable model. According to Dark Crow of Studio FOW, which is the biggest adult SFM studio in the world,
Lara Croft was one of the first nude models ported to the Source engine at the time that we formed, and from a technical standpoint, the model was good enough that we could animate her in different poses without the joints deforming too much.
So, Studio FOW used Lara's model to do unchristian-like things in their debut film, Lara in Trouble, which has 5 million views on Xvideos alone. Though I should note FOW's film also has several articles from major news outlets written about how controversial it is. Because, spoiler alert, it's called Lara in Trouble. She doesn't have a good time. Oh, and one of the articles about this controversy happens to be from the BBC, and I just have to share how terrible it is. Throughout the whole thing, it keeps calling FOW's animations machinimas, which, like, sure, but it also includes such hit lines as, This may all sound a bit shonky and niche, tittering nerds coding in Wi-Fi bedrooms, but machinima porn is more popular and profitable than you might imagine. Honestly, I think after reading that, I'd be more ashamed to be British than to be into SFM, but that's just me. Some other notable mentions in the history would also be World of Warcraft, Street Fighter, Resident Evil, and Final Fantasy, which would have been mostly 10 through 13 at that point. Lollipop Chainsaw had a huge run for a while, same with Borderlands, Arkham City, and Skyrim. Really, if there was a female character with an interesting design in an early 2010s game, they got their model downloaded, undressed, and put into various lovemaking positions with the scout from TF2. Though, as we covered in the beginning, nothing out there was really like BioShock Infinite. Released March of 2013, the same month as the Tomb Raider reboot, as a sequel to what many consider the greatest game of all time, Infinite quickly jumped up the charts of most popular games to make Rule 34 out of, coming close to the number of posts that Tomb Raider was getting on Pahil in the years after launch, and actually outpacing it in SFM animations. This is just speculation on my part, but I'd say the reason is a combination of a couple things. One is that Elizabeth's character design was almost perfect for this type of stuff. She has a very distinct look to her with a simple, cel-shaded art style that's pretty easy to make look nice in SFM. Plus, her appearance is constantly changing, using several different models throughout the game that the community ripped out and worked on. Everything from her initial innocent appearance to her more confident look by the end, to the femme fatale redesign she gets in Burial at Sea. There was a lot of variety you got out of one character that made her interesting to different people. Though, what I would say is more important is that BioShock Infinite, more than any other game I've really mentioned, really focused on Elizabeth as a character. From the beginning of the game's development, Elizabeth was a central piece of the puzzle, with Irrational Games dedicating an entire team they called the Liz Squad to just giving her more animations and interactable objects and ways she can engage with the player and the world. The entire story is focused around her growth, taking as much time as possible to make her seem like a real person with motivations and goals. Plus, even in gameplay, there was this massive push to make her useful and dependable, all in an attempt to get the player to feel emotionally invested. Now, this worked wonders for people just playing the game. A lot of the awards and praise that BioShock Infinite got was because of how real and likable Elizabeth was as a character. But for the people making lewd artwork of her, well, now they could effectively borrow all that emotional investment for their works. Someone watching even a simple looping GIF would add context or backstory to it from their own experience playing the game, which got them more invested in the Rule 34, which made them like Elizabeth even more, so on and so forth. Just 7 months after the game's launch, in an AMA on Reddit about the new DLC coming out, series creator Ken Levine would even have a bit of a mental breakdown over this, saying,
"Seriously, whoever is doing the Elizabeth on DeviantArt, please stop it. You're killing me. It's like coming across a picture of your daughter. I die a little on the inside with every page view."
But, as anyone familiar with the Barbra Streisand effect would know, this didn't cause anyone to stop what they were doing. And actually, after Burial at Sea came out, even more Rule 34 would get made of Elizabeth. Now, I'm not saying that this is what caused Ken Levine to basically leave the gaming industry. After all, when he did leave Irrational Games and laid off 70 of its employees in 2014, he said he did it because he was sick of BioShock and didn't want to keep making the same game over and over again. However, after I read that, I checked the trailer for his new game, Judas, and that is just BioShock again. Ken Levine just lied to me. So I'm saying he shut down Irrational because of all the Elizabeth and nothing but a defamation lawsuit or $20 will stop me. Also, as a fun counterexample to Ken Levine freaking out on Reddit, there's this very sweet DeviantArt post from one of the concept artists for BioShock Infinite, where they saw so much Rule 34 of the Lutece twins, who they designed, that they put out a style guide on how to draw their underwear. Here's my favorite line from it.
"I'm not one to discourage this sort of thing. No, I have sketchbooks full of Remus serious stuff from high school, but I figured I might as well give everyone a leg up with a more detailed guide to Rosalind Lutece's potential underthings. I've seen a ton of drawings of her in corsets from a good 50 years before her time, and I needed to step in. I do not know if this counts as fan art or not since I'm the one doing it. Whatever. Research or die, motherfuckers."
So, BioShock Infinite was a massive success, with massive amounts of Rule 34 made about it, that even reached the people making the game. Did it massively influence 3D animation? This part of the video was admittedly the toughest to do research on, because how do you prove or disprove something like this? I could pull up the user numbers for Source Filmmaker and show there wasn't a big spike around Infinite's release, and Blender's numbers don't really show any different. But Rule 34 is only a small portion of total users anyway. Okay, well how about I tell you that from 2013 to 2015, BioShock Infinite had 1,500 posts made about it on Pahil, whereas Mass Effect had over 5,000, still outnumbering Infinite 3-1 if you narrow things down to stuff made in SFM. Does that prove anything? No? Okay. I would at this point go through individual 3D animators' pages and try to find advancements that way, but this is where we get to why I never brought up Source Filmmaker until now. Most of the stuff made with it is gone. You see, despite me hyping it up so much, Newgrounds actually had this funny little rule regarding 3D animation. One of the major policies on Newgrounds since its inception was that you had to have created everything you uploaded, which seems fair enough. There were parodies and transformative uses of existing copyright aplenty, but why not try to keep blatant content theft to a minimum? However, the way Newgrounds defined this was that if you made a 3D animation, you also had to have personally created every model and asset within it too, which, as we just went over, most SFM animators did not, so most of it was banned from the site. In fact, still written into Newgrounds' terms of service is the line, "If you did not create the character models, please do not share your piece in the art portal. If you are creating your own models and your work is removed, PM Tom." Yeah, just send a direct message to the owner of the website if you want to post here. Surely that'll be quick and easy, he's probably not busy. This policy, combined with the Steam Workshop not allowing not safe for work content of any kind, meant that pretty much everything to do with adult SFM animations, and later Blender animations and anything else, had to exist in their own little bubbles of the internet. Most animators at the time pretty exclusively posted their art to Tumblr, Reddit, and other social media, and got their models from various places like SFM Labs, which was alright before Tumblr wiped adult content from their site in 2019, Reddit's video hosting site GiphyCat did the same in 2020, and Imager followed suit in 2023. And that's not even mentioning the subreddits and various other sites that just shut down altogether. The main reason I've been referencing Pahil so much for examples of early content and popularity is because it's one of the main content aggregators that's still around. A lot of the places that it took that content from, dead links. If someone didn't have their work posted to a Boru, it might actually be impossible to find. So at this point, I just gave up on looking into BioShock Infinite. I figured this might be enough proof that it didn't really change much. It certainly wasn't comparable to when film developed color, don't think I need a source to dispute that. But what else can I do other than talk to the animators who were around at the time? None of them really have public contact info. Never mind. I personally messaged about a dozen artists and animators for general research on this video, and most of them didn't respond to my DMs. But of the ones who did, two are very important to this discussion. May I present to you Lord Aardvark and Fugtrup, two adult 3D animators who not only predate Source Filmmaker entirely, starting out with Gary's mod back in like 2011, but were pretty foundational for both SFM and BioShock Infinite Rule 34. The first animations made about Elizabeth in the weeks after the game came out were from them. Lord Aardvark actually made some of the first nude models for Elizabeth on SFM Labs in 2014, and Fugtrup has several of the most popular BioShock Rule 34 posts on Pahil, and the most popular Source Filmmaker posts on the site, period. If you want to talk about any breakthroughs that BioShock had in 3D animation, these are literally the people who would be responsible. And so I asked them, what do you think of this tweet?
Yeah, I hate this tweet because I feel like the person doesn't know what they're talking about. I've never heard anything remotely like that. Every tool that 3D pornography uses has existed before. I don't know of a single case where R34 animation required a technological breakthrough. 3D animation has been around for ages. We all use tools that every 3D artist uses.
Okay, that was a very clear answer, and Lord Aardvark actually just replied to me with a meme they made about how much people have sent them that tweet, before saying,
Right, so really it's more of a meme. Fun tale to tell, like how porn won the VHS wars, but the reality is that porn animation co-evolved with the rest of the scene. When people think of jiggle animation, they think of things like titties and butts, but the reality is that tech was built for more innocuous things. For example, the jiggle bones in Source that widely popularized the jiggly boobs and whatnot were originally built by Valve for the antlion wings to jostle about when they move. We simply co-opted the tech.
So considering both of these people independently gave me the same response, I'm gonna say we finally got our answer. BioShock Infinite was popular. Not the most popular, but it was up there, and the people who made Rule 34 of it didn't single-handedly innovate 3D as we know it, but they learned pre-existing techniques, adapted them to fit, and then improved on them.
When the Elizabeth model became available, it certainly brought a lot of new animators into the scene, and naturally this resulted in a surge of fresh content. However, I would argue that the Mass Effect models such as Liara and Miranda, and to a lesser extent the Lara Croft reboot model in 2013, were responsible for bigger breakthroughs. I remember those models were innovative, and their presence led to a huge surge of content creators on sites such as Digital Arrow. Everyone had the Mass Effect models. I'm not so sure Elizabeth ever became as popular as Liara.
If you look at what Fugtrupp and Aardvark and any of the other SFM animators are doing today, you'll see this massive improvement in their field, where people found something they liked making and used it to hone their skills and get better. Rule 34 artists have always been scrappy, creative people who worked around limitations to make something good. They shared models and resources and used what they had to push their own boundaries. I mean, taking Jigglebones from the Half-Life 2 Antlions and turning that into boob physics, that's impressive. Why don't we celebrate and give recognition to that instead of just making stuff up? If you want proof of how hard these people are working to make 3D models look sexy, Lord Aardvark even sent me an entire white paper someone wrote about penetration technologies that were implemented in a not safe for work game that's out on Steam. And another artist I reached out to, Scudbutt, sent me a furry animator who is constantly posting all their different methods, including my favorite tweet of all time, the Splatbox. There is serious thought going into improving adult 3D animation, and every day people have been raising the bar in the space. Not just because of one game, not just because they wanted to see smut, but because they wanted to make art. These animators don't need to be responsible for several breakthroughs in 3D animation to deserve recognition for their hard work. Just look at what they've made and let it speak for itself. Though if you want to see some real crazy shit, we haven't even gotten to Overwatch. Released in 2016 and made by the company that brought you World of Warcraft and what The Guardian describes as a frat boy workplace culture, Overwatch is a multiplayer hero shooter that owes all of its success to the fact that every character in it is hot. Do I have any facts to justify that claim? No. Is there an entire Wikipedia article dedicated to all the made about it? Absolutely. The day the game was announced, on November 7th, 2014, people already posted erotic fan art of the main characters, which isn't unusual. The same thing happened to BioShock Infinite. However, a year before launch, while the game was still in beta in 2015, people started ripping the models and making animations with them. The first one I found being from Puposterous, who is now a very successful animator in the space. And these early animations were surprisingly great, because just like how BioShock and Tomb Raider had coincided with the release of SFM, Overwatch's beta had come out around the same time that other 3D software started to get good. You might have noticed I had skipped over all the other animation software people were using over the last couple years. There were quite a lot of works made with 3ds Max, Maya, and Blender, some that looked miles better than the competition, but all of those programs were much more complex and still took about 100 times longer to render than SFM ever did, so the bulk of what was being made was through that. But as technology caught up, people's computers got more powerful and more artists just started the process of learning full 3D, SFM would get quickly outpaced. Blender 2.8, which would promise massively improved real-time editing, full physics systems, and a complete overhaul to the UI, was announced the same time as the Overwatch beta. And during that beta, artists like Eloas were already putting out animations with Maya that looked way more like the Pixar quality stuff people joke about Overwatch having today. Plus, those SFM animators now had several years' experience under their belt to show off with this new game.
Blender and Eevee are responsible for lowering render times and allowing for such advances as soft body physics and fluid collision. SFM was a very archaic, albeit useful, piece of software even when it was released in 2013. It was never in a stable state. Blender is continually supported and has received a lot of good updates over the years, making 3D easier than ever to make.
It was this really seamless combination of this roster of very attractive characters with high quality models, with people learning more complex 3D software that allowed for better results, that led to the boom of 3D Rule 34 that we saw in 2016. It took less than 6 months after launch for more porn to be made from Overwatch than has ever been made of BioShock ever. It also became the 11th most searched term on the hub, period, in 2016, and in 2023 it currently has just about as many posts on Pahil as everything else made with Source Filmmaker combined. Again, it's tricky to prove or disprove this stuff, but if you want to talk about a game's Rule 34 having an impact on 3D animation, Overwatch blows every other game out of the water. It's not even close. I'd even go out on a limb and say that at this point, if there's any game whose legacy is mostly defined by Rule 34, it is Overwatch. Few games have had an impact so large and an adult fan community so thriving. You've got hundreds of thousands of likes on social media posts, tens of millions of views on animations, and the animators behind it are all making thousands a month on Patreon. The game in 2021 crossed over 60 million players, but the number of people who watched the Rule 34 easily dwarfs that, which Blizzard definitely did not like, since the company had a much more Ken Levine-esque outlook on parodies made of their game, similarly making Tracer the most popular character for Rule 34 after removing a victory pose they deemed too sexual, and going so far as to send cease and desist letters to prominent artists and websites, including Studio FOW, who I mentioned before, SFM Labs and other places that hosted nude models, and Pahil itself, which had to change the Overwatch tag to Overlook in an attempt to stay under the radar. Funnily enough, in the exact same way they changed the Pokemon tag after similar complaints from Nintendo. But any and all attempts to stop the smut train were in vain. With that full release of Blender 2.8 in 2019, the amount of 3D animators hit never-before-seen numbers, as it became something much easier to pick up for yourself. 3D Rule 34 became sort of a mainstay in the culture that, at this point, has to be so popular I'm certain nobody watching this video hasn't seen it before. Just like the 2010s, games that come out nowadays almost immediately have people making 3D erotica from their characters. You had The Witcher 3 and Metal Gear Solid 5 back in 2015, Breath of the Wild and the new Resident Evils popped off online, and you've probably heard this one before, but the Final Fantasy VII Remake even had so many animations made of it that during a Zoom meeting with an Italian senator, someone put one on display for a full 30 seconds before it got taken down.
Risultati della ricerca medica e scientifica, insieme alla loro repentina accessibilità.
And we've talked about people trying to fight this, or just generally disliking adult art of their game's characters, but that isn't always the case. Back in 2017, around the launch of Nier Automata, there was a bit of controversy surrounding someone photoshopping the main character 2B's butt to have visible hole behind her thong, which caused people to start posting that all over the internet. And mind you, this is already a game where the camera looks up her skirt every time you climb a ladder, and if you hold both sticks down, 2B will self-destruct and explode her clothes off. So the genius mind behind that mechanic and the whole game, Yoko Taro, went on Twitter to clear things up, saying, "I've seen a lot of pictures of 2B's butt in the news, but it's a pain to collect them all, so I'd like them to be delivered to me in a zip file every week." God, I love this man. A couple hours after that tweet went viral, people even started actually sending him zip files of 2B Rule 34, to which he responded, "The internet is amazing." And it's that sort of fun engagement with the community that I love to see. Between that and the BioShock Infinite concept artist, it is really great to see people actually appreciate the work going into adult parody art. Because it's not going anywhere. If there's one thing we know for certain, it's that year after year, Rule 34 has only gotten more popular and more well-known and more searched for. With games like Fortnite integrating every character they can, we're seeing those characters drawn in loot situations on a much larger scale. Every time a new hit like Overwatch comes out, people are going to make better and better adult animations of it. Yet for all of that popularity and success, it is bizarre how much of this history seems to go unnoticed or undocumented. Really, the only reason I made this video is because I just wanted to fact check one simple, seemingly easy to prove statement, and I had to literally reach out to some of the people responsible in order to get an answer. It should not have been that difficult. No hate to the original poster, by the way. It is a very funny tweet, and I'm not trying to make this some big takedown of what is obviously a joke. I just thought it was funny how many people sort of believed it and how little is actually written about it. And it's a shame, really, because we just went over how much has actually been influenced by adult artwork and parodies, how it shaped copyright law and started the careers of well-known animators. There's so many real milestones and achievements that could be celebrated instead of obviously exaggerated ones. But that would require any of this info to be talked about or easily available. You can feel free to look through my references page and see just how many links are using the Wayback Machine because the original source got taken down, either because of copyright complaints or the website hosting it suddenly not wanting to be associated with porn. After what we saw with the Air Pirates and that poor Doujinshi artist, it's no wonder nobody fights for their work to stay up, but I don't even know how you'd track any of it down without being obsessively interested or just being around when it happened. Adult content in general has just always had this problem where it's treated as disposable, as something fun in the moment to enjoy, but never something you should record or keep track of or think any deeper about. If you're an adult artist, it's highly likely your work can just get obliterated from the internet with no recourse. And that's just how it goes. The amount of online spaces where you can share not safe for work content feels like it's shrinking every day. I mean, I opened this video by telling you it has a good chance of getting demonetized and kicked out of the algorithm for even bringing up this subject. Even though, to me at least, all of this is really interesting. This history is fun to go through. And I didn't even scratch the tip of the iceberg. I didn't even cover adult fan fiction or the rest of the hentai scene or the thousands of other artists that were a part of this space that all contributed to its success. Here is a list of just some of them I found that I didn't mention in the video. Now, obviously, a lot of adult content isn't going to hit the mainstream. I don't expect people to talk about this stuff at the water cooler at work or anything. But I think it would be cool if we could have a bit of a more mature discussion about any of it, or if people were a bit more interested in spreading and preserving this info, because otherwise it might all just be gone one day. Let's not kid ourselves, most people watch porn. I know it, you know it, there's a couple asexuals who started typing in my comment section who probably still know it. Why don't we celebrate the artists that work hard to make it and everything they've done? Why don't we share the history of the space and try to learn a bit more about it? Why don't we treat the adult art scene with the same respect as any other? It's the very least we can do. Thank you so much for watching. This video crushed my soul and definitely takes the record for most research I've ever done on anything. I hope you liked it. I would seriously recommend checking out the references list for this video because some of the articles and books I found on the subject really are fascinating. Plus, go give artists like Fugtrup and Lord Aardvark and Scudbutt a follow. They make great stuff. I really appreciate them taking the time to talk to me and share some insights. And thank you to the patrons for all your support that makes videos like this possible. Once again, you're really missing out on a lot by watching this censored. For just $1, you can get access to videos like this one early and free from bleeps and blurs. And every single person that supports me brings me one step closer to not relying on YouTube for income, which means I can afford to take risks on videos like this one. Plus, if you want to support the channel even more, you can check out the company willing to sponsor anything, Gamersupps, who makes some truly delicious zero-calorie energy drink formulas that get me through long video projects like this one. And, relevant to the video, you can check out their great selection of waifu cups, which feature spicy drawings that you can show off while staying nice and hydrated. Head to gamersupps.gg/Lextorias for 10% off, or use code Lextorias at checkout. Part of your proceeds go to a good cause, that good cause being my bank account. Now, if you'll excuse me, I am going to head into hibernation and work on videos that don't take me a month just to get demonetized instantly. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.